want to welcome especially our colleagues from Mapula Embroidery Project who come across. Very nice to see you, thank you. Please chip in when you like. And I'd like to thank also especially the University of Johannesburg for making available their fabulous series which are included in this exhibition. Some of the works on exhibition are part of WAM's collection and some are from UJ, and it's I think a really lovely opportunity to have the group together. Before we start our conversation, I'm going to introduce South African art historian Brenda Schmahmann, who is my colleague here and is going to be filling us in on a whole lot of the critical things around the Mapula project and the Mapula story and her relationship to it. Brenda holds the Saatchi Chair in South African Art and Visual Culture at UJ. She is an art historian, has done extensive work on gender in South African art, including research on community projects which use needlework, one of which, of course, is the Mapula Embroidery Project. She's also focused extensively on the politics of public art. The 10 volumes she's authored or edited include Material Matters, appliques by the Weya Women of Zimbabwe, and Needlework by South African collectives, Mapula Embroidery and Empowerment in the Winterveld, and the Keiskammer Art Project, Restoring Hope and Livelihoods. She's also, though, the author of about 90 articles or book chapters, including a number of engagements with Mapula. Amongst the Mapula engagements is work on the examples on show here. She has an article on the covert cloths at the UJ collection, published in Textile, Cloth and Culture in 2023. Those are the ones on the far wall behind us. And has a book chapter in press on the Navigating Adversity works, which recently entered the WAM collection and are on show here. Those are those 4 on that wall and the 2 there. So there really is nobody better equipped to be able to tell us something about Mapula and about the embroidery project. And I'd like to just hand over and ask you to go ahead and do that.
Okay, well, I haven't prepared a lecture, so I'd like to perhaps just start with questions, and if you want to ask me. Or maybe what we can start is where the Winterveld is and the context of the project, so people can understand that better, if that's what people would like. What we understand is the Winterveld is about 40 kilometers northwest of Pretoria. And the project involves an area called New Easteris as well. The women often refer to it as Hammanskraal, it's actually New Easteris. The Winterveld's got a particularly complicated history, involved very much in the Native Lands Act. There was an expansion of the pathetic amount of 6% to a slightly less pathetic, but still pathetic amount of about 13% of lands that could be afforded to black South Africans for purchase in the 1930s. And that's when the 2 farms that were constituting the Winterveld were made available, and so people came and purchased these properties. They were divided up. The idea was that they would be farmed, but they were completely unsuitable for farming. So the landowners began to sublet land there. There was absolutely no infrastructure at all. Things got further complicated when people were simply dumped there by the apartheid government, removing people from areas of Pretoria, for example. And then to make matters still worse, they put the Winterveld under Bophuthatswana in that brilliant, I'm sure you understand, I'm being sarcastic, idea of homelands in South Africa. It was supposedly a Tswana homeland, Bophuthatswana, but in fact about 80% of people in the Winterveld speak other languages. So people there found themselves actually without rights in Botswana or rights in South Africa. So it was a terrible situation. People had no right to pensions, no right to have informal businesses or whatever. They were just absolutely, so it was a terrible situation. The Mapula project arose as a sort of result of interventions that began firstly by the Sisters of Mercy from the 1970s in the area. They built a literacy center, for example, a school. Then the Seroptimists International began to become involved with them to start an initiative. Seroptimists International is a group of professional women. And Corin Scovran, who was formerly from UNISA, late Corin Scovran was there, and then she brought in other people from UNISA, notably Janette van der Merwe, who's with us today, and who still remains with the project some 30 years later. So this was in 1991, and the project started developing embroideries, which began to sell, and they developed their subject matter over the years, and developed in the project that we know today, a really exciting initiative that had a lot of impact in the area, providing opportunities for women who were really destitute, and providing us also with some really beautiful works of art. So that's a sort of sum in the background.
So I want to jump from there to why an exhibition now, and I think we're going to move backwards and forwards between the Mapula context and the COVID context.
Yeah.
Not that they are different, because they're so linked here. But the prompt for this exhibition for me was the realization that 2025 is 5 years since the World Health Organization declared COVID-19 to be a global pandemic. It's 5 years since that crazy time that we all experienced, that we survived, those of us who are here. But I don't feel like COVID is done with us, or maybe we're not done with COVID. I feel like the speed with which we all had to do those horrible things like pivot. Do you remember the word pivot? We all had to pivot to an online context. We all had to learn new COVID language, things like flattening the curve and, practicing social distancing or physical distancing and the difference between those two things. We all had to learn how to use Zoom and, online platforms. Some of those practices have stayed with us. We at WAM still use Teams for our group meetings instead of all sitting together in the boardroom or something. But the impact of that time, the 100,000 South Africans who died officially of COVID and the many more excess deaths that were probably attributed to COVID, caused massive losses, obviously losses of loved ones for those families left behind. In addition, though, substantial other kinds of losses, big losses and small losses. The losses for the school leavers who didn't get to have their matric dance. The losses for the first year university students who had 5 weeks on campus and the rest of their degree was an online experience. The losses for the grandparents who didn't get to spend the time with their grandchildren growing up. The losses for the people who could not attend the funerals of those who had died because of the restrictions around the numbers of people. And my sense is that in a way we've had to just get on with it and move on with it. And COVID wasn't just 2020, it lasted right through until 2022. And yet here we are 5 years later, and it seemed opportune to revisit that time, also because of the impact of this series behind me, which is called 2020 Through the Eye of a Needle. And this I first saw in the virtual exhibition that Brenda organized, curated, I think, by Leila Randera. Yes?
I think so.
And I hate online exhibitions. I personally find them an incredibly unsatisfying format. I don't like that practice where there's take a floor plan and it flips up like that, and then you can press a button and you can zoom in and look at. Well, this one wasn't like that. And the power and the impact of these embroideries really moved me, even sitting looking at them on my laptop at home, at that horrible time. We then set out to acquire them and to purchase them. The series travelled to Texas, was it, Janetja? First. To a quilt exhibition before it came back, and then we bought it. But one of the things about this particular series is the way that the embroiderers, the designers and the embroiderers have picked out certain things for each month of 2020. The way it's organized, it starts with a fever tree and it ends with a fever tree, because fever. Then there's 3 months, each panel is a different month, and then there's a tree in between. So the trees kind of punctuate the seasons along the way. But at the end of this little talk, I hope you'll have a chance to look at it more closely. You'll see that the first 2 panels are the kind of fun in the sun, summer kind of activities, because although we'd heard about COVID and Wuhan, was it? In China, where COVID was, it was. And we had the sense of this lurking something. I certainly did not have any understanding about what was to come. And then in March it came, and we entered a really heavy lockdown with all of those rules that were put in place. But I think I'm going to hand back to Brenda now, because of course the series behind me came after the UJ COVID cloths.
Yeah, the story of the COVID cloths was during COVID. So we were in lockdown stage 5, and it was a couple of weeks into it, and 2 thoughts struck me. One of the thoughts that struck me is, how are the Mapula Embroiderers going to be earning a living when all their markets are shut down? Until one was there, one didn't really think about or realize the impact on our sort of practitioners like them. We're very dependent on, I think, retailers, tourism, and things like that. There was one thought that struck me. Another thought that struck me is from working with Mapula for a long time. I've noticed obviously that they have often used international disasters or local disasters as subject matter. So that if you go back to 2000, they represented the floods in Mozambique. 2001, they represented 9/11. Was it 2004? Was it 5, 6 around there? The tsunami they represented. So I thought they're going to represent COVID. They're going to want to represent COVID. And then I put these two thoughts together and I thought, well, wouldn't it be nice if I could give them an opportunity to make those works on COVID so it'll actually address something they'd want to do and be inclined to do anyway, I'm sure, but do so at a time when they need the income. So I thought of that, and then I'm in a particularly fortunate position with my chair, where I've got research monies at my disposal. And I thought if I commission them, I can justify the monies by doing research on the cloths after they've done, so that's fine. And then the works, I can't take the works, they can't belong to me, but they can belong to the University of Johannesburg. So I sort of put that idea together and commissioned, chatted to Yaneki about the monies I thought were available and how many cloths we should get, and we came up with 14 cloths. And this was probably just into April, I think, of 2020. So that's how the project came about. I was really wanted the makers to represent COVID as they wanted to not feel constrained that I had a particular agenda in mind of what I wanted represented. And Yaneki conveyed this to people telephonically, lots of cell phone calls. And that's how they came about. So they were sort of a lovely surprise to me. I saw some drawings as they were happening. But so that they were commissioned in lockdown stage 5, but got produced by lockdown stage about 3. They actually started on the last one at stage 2. So quite interesting that they were made during COVID and to address COVID in some ways, yeah.
I can just mention when the lockdown started,
Yeah.
we were totally catatonic. And I thought it's the end of the project. And then Brenda rang about 2 weeks in, just after lockdown, and said, shouldn't we do this? And I didn't even think of it. I couldn't think of anything. And you just got us moving, and then everything evolved from there. Thank you.
Oh, it's a pleasure. I mean, for me it was so exciting. And then I think what happened from that is that Sally Curran, who headed the trust, thought, well, let's make large series. And then she came up with this concept of a work done in 2021, but about 2020, looking retrospectively and looking not only at COVID, but also the events that were against a COVID background, which is what we ended up in the Wits Art Museum. And I'm so sort of thrilled Wits bought it. But it was so funny with the exhibition when I think about it as well, because we were going to put up the exhibition physically in my little gallery that we've got at our facilities at 33 Twickenham Avenue. Then I thought I want to get the Mapula women to come across to see the work there. So we'll have a lunch or tea or something. I was trying to think of something like that. And at that stage, of course, COVID got in the way. So all these security arrangements at the university. And I had these 4 security men come onto my property, but the property I work from, and say, no, you need 1 toilet for every 4 women. And you've only got 2 toilets here. And you need this much space between each person. And so the thing became impossible. And then I was sort of really perturbed about that. And then it turned out that the work needed to go to America sooner than we had thought. So in fact, the digital exhibition became a solution both to the securocrats who were worried about the number of toilets on my property and the fact that the work needed to go anyway. So that's how we ended up with a digital exhibition. Yeah.
But talking securocrats and toilets, one of the difficulties of trying to keep WAM alive at that time, because all of our work is around real time, real space, real art, real experience. The point for us of engaging with an artwork is not to engage through pixels, but to be in the physical presence of that thing. Because I think that is different. So much of our world is experienced through a screen, which has huge opportunities and provides wonderful access to all sorts of things. But it's not the same. It's not the same. And so when we could no longer have WAM open on that 9th of March, was it?
26, 26, I think.
26. We did have to find ways of trying to engage in the online world in a way that, in whatever way we could. But as soon as we were able to start reopening the physical space, it was all about engaging with capacity calculations. And the youths got very good at working with the floor plans of this particular gallery downstairs and doing the maths and working out how many people were allowed to be in here at any one time and how the sanitizers had to be positioned. And at that time we were sort of falling between the education rules and the art and entertainment rules. And part of what we also had to do was have a dedicated space so that if somebody coughed, they had to be escorted and be isolated in that separate space, and campus health had to be called. It's so odd to think about all of that now, but that was very much our daily experience and our lived experience. Do you remember in the Pick and Pay, the queues at the tills and needing to make sure you sort of had a trolley space between you and the person in front and behind you, and all the restrictions about what you were and weren't allowed to buy because of all of those crazy rules. And the fear, remember living with that fear, because to start off with, none of us knew how you got sick. We knew that we got sick from somebody else. And whether it's the person in the queue in Pick and Pay or your chance encounter with somebody on, it really became, I think, one of the most destructive things about that experience was the entrenchment, yet again in a South African context, of the other as being the site of contagion, and being frightened of being in public spaces, being frightened of being in crowds. It's one of the big losses of a place like WAM, where everybody is welcome and anybody can come and it's free, and you mingle with whoever happens to be in that space. Well, if the spaces like this, or the parks, or the shopping centres are shut down, then that mingling space is not possible. You are isolated even further in your own little bubble. And that's not what South Africa needs at all. We don't need to be further isolated from each other. So, sorry, that was a bit of a rant, but nonetheless, that was part of why this opportunity to have this exhibition here again mattered. I want to revert to the textiles and ask Brenda to talk a little about, you mentioned the selection of motifs, of objects, of things that got included in the panels, and how some of them are very specifically COVID related, and others are things that happened during that particular time that are not necessarily COVID related. People who passed away, some who passed away of COVID, and some who passed away for other reasons. But also maybe talk about the source of some of the imagery and the kind of tension between the received message about how we need to stay safe and observe all these regulations and guidelines, and the lived reality about what is possible under circumstances where, for example, you have many people living in a small space.
Yeah, that was one of the things I noticed, and you can see it particularly if you look at, I think it's the embroidery by Doris Longwani at the back there. That they often sort of particular when I sort of suggested represent COVID, the sources often used were instructions about COVID. So it was wash your hands and keep distance, and so there's some fairly instructional embroideries, and it's really quite interesting how they create a particular message, because they create the message that the Mapula people observe these regulations themselves and are telling you to do the same as the viewer, is the kind of message you see. But in fact, there's a certain paradox, because if you look at the messages, they would have been almost impossible for people living in the Winterveld to observe. So all these things about sanitation, for example, whereas in the Winterveld, people live in tiny houses, often about 6 people or more in a home, single tap outside if they're lucky, rather than having easy sanitation, and outside pit toilets, rather than having inside plumbing. So that actually adhering to those sorts of regulations and all the hand washing and everything else would have been completely impossible. So there's this tension between reality and what one actually sees there. I also was quite interested, and if you go to the entrance, you'll see that in one of the 2 embroideries there. There's a lot of things about food parcels. I made an interesting observation. I looked at the one that's close to the top there, which was designed by Emmanuel Maepa, one of the original founders' son, who did a lot of drawing at one stage while also working as a policeman. And I compared that one with Doris Longwani's thing of food parcels, and I noticed there was such a difference. Emmanuel, when drawing this, focuses on this amazing activity, and everybody's taking things off the truck, and it's all lively, it's all sort of observed activity. Doris Longwani, the woman designer, just shows rice, sugar, and I can't remember, I think it was sap. Yeah. And she said to me, that's what I think food parcels should be. Those 3 things, because you can make a lot of things from that. So it was so interesting. It was almost like she's observing it as somebody who cooks whereas I don't think Emmanuel ever cooks. So there are little things like that that I found really interesting looking at them. But also the issue of showing food parcels in the first place. When I interviewed the women who designed them and the group leaders, not a single one had ever received a food parcel during all that sort of things that were being promoted during COVID, that everybody will get these parcels. So if you look at the embroideries, you see as if everybody is getting all this, their needs looked after and receiving this amazing supply of food, which was not the case at all. So they would like there to be food parcels available for everybody, for there to be flourishing gardens despite the lack of water, and all those sorts of things. So there's an interesting relationship between them and the actual lived reality. I think the tendency to focus on positive things both reflects their aspirations, and I think, because the project's been going so long, a very real perception that often works that are most positive will sell better. So I think it's become almost a default position to put a positive spin on most things, even when they're very difficult situations, often.
Brenda, back to food parcels. In your article about the UJ Clubs, you talk about the impact of the COVID shutdown on things like spaza shops.
Yeah.
And the difficulty of being able to simply obtain food.
Yep.
Can you talk a bit about those realities also?
So people in communities, Winterveld's peri-urban, they would normally rely largely on local sellers to get your daily food. People don't have a lot of money and the means to go out to the supermarket as I do, because I don't like shopping and buy a fortnight worth of food and then not have to bother about it again. People go and would buy small amounts of food from local sellers on an almost daily basis. Those sellers were not allowed to be out there selling. So there was nobody selling food, quite apart from the money to buy it. So that there was like a lot of issues with, I think, hunger in a very real sense.
And the transport.
The transport to get
so
there.
expensive
Yeah.
to get to the shopping centres.
Yeah.
They don't have that money.
Yeah. Complete lack. So that was those kind of real infrastructural problems. So I think there was a lot of hunger during COVID, despite all the rhetoric about food parcels. And that sometimes comes up in the embroideries that creates a much more positive spin on it. Yeah.
In terms of the adversity series, these 6 self-portraits are WAM's 2025 purchases from the Mapula project. So they're brand new into our collection, haven't yet been accessioned even. But I thought that they made a fantastic addition because of the fact of them being self-portraits. The group leaders also, and Janette, maybe you can tell us how the logistics are worked out. The group leaders, the designers, the embroiderers, how that sort of
How the structure works.
how the structure works.
It's, there are 140 women. What's that? Can you hear me? There are 140 women in the project, and it's divided into 3 groups with 3 group coordinators. The one who's in Yesterdays, and then Rosina Mayefa, she's got a bigger group, and then Cindy, the singer. And what happens is that, let me just think, the coordinators look after the work.
So I think in
Not adversity work. So we have 5 artists as well. And then we got 8 people to do this adversity class. And they had to talk about the difficult, navigating adversity in difficult circumstances. So the artists do the drawing. Dora Shlongwane would do her drawing and her story about adversity. And then Rosina Mayefa, who's a coordinator, would do her story. But the other 3 coordinators aren't artists. So some of the artists would relate their story.
Yeah. Yes, thank you. Thank you.
Do you want me to give more? Yeah. Do you want me to talk a little bit about that series?
Yes, please.
Okay. Sorry, I was trying to grab your microphone, forgetting I had one of my own. How I understand it with Unique is it was started with the 5 women designers. I think Emmanuel had sort of drifted from the project largely.
He was always in the producer.
Yeah. So there were the 5 women who were designers. That was Elizabeth Malete, Doris Lagwani, Maria Ringani, Kalela Mayepa, and who have I left out? Doris Longwan. So the 5 of them participated in a workshop in which they were asked to discuss the adversities they experience, but also how they overcome them. They were given pencils and paper and to discuss and draw these ideas. In the course of the workshop, I think Yaneki had the idea of bringing in a self-portrait in the middle of the format. So all that was imposed on the drawers was that the drawing needed to be frontal and of a particular scale. And so those 5 works were produced, and they were so successful and gave the women such satisfaction that it was decided to extend them to the 3 group leaders as well.
Sorry, now I remember. It's part of a fundraising project. We raise the funds. We tell the people this is what, we tell possible donors, this is what we plan, and if they would like to contribute. So if we get 70,000 rands or 80,000, we can divide it into 8 cloths. And then we sell it afterwards to sustain the project.
Yeah.
So we have a big project, and that was Sally Curran's brainchild, starting with this. And then carrying on was this, and then one on the planet, on climate change, and then the adversity.
Yeah, so the climate change was 2022, and the was 2020.
And it's all to do, it was our fundraising.
Yeah.
Ask donors and you can put their name on or anything.
Yeah, so it was amazing. I noticed, are there names on the Navigating Adversity? I don't think they are.
The donors' name.
Yeah, they aren't.
No.
Yeah.
And also not on the planet
Yeah.
climate change class. There were 11, I think, of those. And we sold them to people in the United States. So we're really glad. And so with the fundraising money, we pay out to the women in producing the class. And then when we sell it, that money sustains the project. The accountants invested that for that, because we try and pay as much money to the women.
Yeah.
We have to be practical as well.
Yeah.
And now we're busy with Project Fabricated Fables, and they have to tell their stories, fables, It was Kate worked that way. So
I'm very excited to see that and hear more about it.
yeah.
I think one of the things that's so interesting about the Dealing with Adversity series is the self-reflexivity, the presentation of self in that image, and then the selection of things to include. Because if you look at them, they're still about the difficulty of growing vegetables in an area where the water is too salty, and how hard it is to keep a fence around the area where you keep your animals, because the wood keeps being stolen for making firewood, or the GBV, widespread GBV experience. I think it's indicative of many rural, especially rural women's experience, that the kind of systemic difficulties of being in those places are ongoing. And, you know, for some of us, our lives have returned much more to normal after the COVID experience, but for many of these women embroiderers experience, their life remains as hard.
But I think the works are also optimistic in a way. I noticed with Maria Rengani's one, which she made about New Easterus, where she lives. When I spoke to her, she placed particular emphasis on the solution they'd found. Like there's a whole systemic problem of lack of electricity. For example, so that, and then women have to and then lack of water, the water only outside. It's a complicated thing about women being vulnerable when they go to the taps outside because there's no electricity. And then often the taps get turned off, and you'd have to go and collect your water at 2 a.m, your bucket of water, and being vulnerable to attack. Excuse me. She spoke about a kind of collective arrangement that they'd made as a group in which they'd pay men in the community a small amount of money who are out of work to basically police the area. I mean, one could argue that women shouldn't be vulnerable in the first place, but nevertheless, there's a kind of solution found through the group operating together.
And the men walk around with vuvuzelas,
Yeah.
and then if there's a crime, then they go. I heard recently 4 of those men were not in that area, but 4 in that area, because it seems as if they created these pockets of crime, looking after the crime, that they were killed.
Sure, that's so terrible. Oh, very sad. Oh. Doris Langwani spoke a lot about mutual support from within the church of a group of women, so her ministries. So people were talking a lot about mutual support within their difficulties.
I'm aware that we've been talking for about 45 minutes. I wanted to bring us back to the exhibition and to the way we've tried to create a space or spaces in this display for everybody to tell their COVID stories. It's a bit of an experiment. I don't think in WAM's history before we've given people pens and said, you know, please write on the wall. And it remains to be seen what we're going to get. But I would like to invite everybody to share to share your COVID stories if you would like to. There are sort of 3 different options. The one is writing on the black wall behind us with the liquid chalk markers. We chose them to be bright colours on a black surface as a kind of visual tribute to the Mapula Embroiderers. We also have a little a mesh up there with a place where you can write a message and tie it on with a piece of wool, again connecting to the narratives of the COVID cloths. I hope by the end of the exhibition it will be bristling with people's messages, and then there are also faces on the wall, blank faces, and pens, which I'm hoping people will pay tribute to an experience or a loved one or a loss. I'm not sure if we're going to, as I say, I'm not sure what we're going to get. We do have wet wipes and we are policing what we get, because we've had quite a lot of Spider-Man and Batman so far, and I'm not sure, maybe that I'm not the target generation, maybe that means a lot in terms of a COVID context for people, I don't know. But we've also had some, phone this number and ask me how I got a 6-pack in 5 weeks, and so I've marked those ones off too. There are, though, some nice conversations happening on the blackboard around, around all the conversations that we had during COVID. Please do take up the opportunity. But please also look really closely at these extraordinary embroideries and take the opportunity of reminding yourself what it was like when the penguins were in the streets in Simon's time, or when Shepherd and Shepherd and Mary Bushiri, this November one, which is one of my favourites, they're in the pink suit and they're heading off, fleeing back to Malawi. Or when Jacob Zuma is walking out of the Zondo Commission, or when, load shedding, Eskom behind us. The kind of, remember that, remember what happened, I remember that. There are, the kind of protest, EFF protest about the Tresemme hair products, or rather the appallingly racist ad about the Tresemme hair products, and the EFF protesting in front of Clicks and shutting Clicks down. We lived through all of that. We remember all of it. We've forgotten a whole lot of it. And if this can act as a prompt about what that time was like, and I know there are some people here who lost very close loved ones. My personal COVID, one of my personal COVID losses was around my GP. I developed a health problem which needed attention and couldn't find a GP to see me because it was right at the beginning of COVID and everyone was terrified, and I needed a physical appointment, and a telephone consult wasn't going to do it. And, the hazmat suit in the parking lot wasn't going to do it either. And eventually found the lovely Dr. Brenda Naidu, who sorted me out and took the time, and it took a while, but she found the solution for me, and she subsequently developed COVID, and that became meningitis, and she was hospitalized, and she was in a coma, and she eventually died 3 years later. And it's particularly painful that her very availability as a health practitioner at a time when many weren't, is probably the reason why she became so ill and died. And there are a lot of stories of really very brave and dedicated health professionals who made enormous sacrifices. There are also a lot of stories of, the food parcel corruption and the PPE theft and everything else, which I suppose is the reflection of South Africa's highs and lows. But in closing, thank you all for coming. Thank you, Brenda.
Pleasure.
If there are any urgent questions from the floor, maybe now's the time to ask them before everybody disperses and goes and looks closely at the artworks or makes their own. Are there any comments in Charlotte?
I'm curious about the consistency of a very refined embroidery technique. So of the 160 people involved, how many actually do the sewing? And does one embroiderer do an entire piece, or how is the work?
I think previously the cloths were often one designer and one embroiderer is the norm. Now it seems to be more common for two embroiderers to work with one designer. That is the sort of norm, but there's some exceptions to the norm. If you look at Selina Makwane's embroideries, for example, she often designs and embroiders herself. She doesn't tend to design for other people, so she does her works herself. She made the beautiful one talking about the Cuban doctor's arrival that's upstairs just as you're coming in. But generally speaking, a designer will, within one group, will do a drawing, and then two embroiderers within that group will work on it.
All 140 women, now it used to go up to 200, but 140 women, they are all embroiderers.
Yeah.
But some embroider better than others. And but I think you talked about the consistency. I'm glad that you saw that.
Quite a
Because
high level of skill.
Beautiful.
It's divided amongst many people.
Yes.
To my eye.
Well, I'm very glad to hear that, because we are always complaining and saying because they don't want to work with frames, to pull it over a frame. It's just how they developed, and so sometimes it puckers, and we have a lot of problem with the puckering, but I'm glad. Thanks.
Hi, I've got a question. And then I want to know, if you say there are 140 embroiderers, then there's only like 14 panels here. What happens to the other embroiderers? Are different series being worked at overlapping times?
Oh, yeah. That is always a problem, to get the embroiderers to try and get the work done. But we make small items for shops. We supply shops with cushion covers, with tote bags for conferences, and we make all kinds of little things. I've even got a little thing here that I wanted to, little pouches and, anything, just to create an income. And the woman only gets paid once their product sells, because, you can't afford to pay everything, and we try and pay them as much as we can. So, certain shops support us, and in Cape Town we get commissions, and we try and divide it. Some women won't get as much as other women.
But again, a certain women use like the big art pieces and others use for the shop pieces. Or is it more flexible?
The coordinators decide who embroiders, and I think sometimes if we need something urgently, we will get the embroiderers that embroider faster than the others. Some take 2 months to do something, or 3 months. They pace themselves. So the coordinators are in charge there. I know very little about that. The coordinators manage everything. I hope that answers it.
There is a video on the Mapula project which is on display there. We just muted the sound. The lovely Paul Mills made it for the Mapula project. And it gives you a good idea of both the physical environment and the kind of context and the products and the individuals involved in making making the work. So maybe you can have a look at that too.
And it's also on YouTube
It's also on YouTube.
and on Facebook and Instagram under Mapula Embroiderers on the website.
Bayes was asked me to give a plug to our little booklet which we produced for this event. It's for this exhibition. It's only the 2020 panels. It's not, doesn't include the adversity ones or the UJ ones, and it's not the education resource, right? And have a look that we often produce for schools. It's really a tribute booklet to the 5-year commemoration mark and to this, what I continue to think of as a really magnificent piece. Love it to bits. Thank you, Yanicha. Thank you, Brenda, for showing. And I'm thrilled that we were able to get it for the collection.
And so glad that Vince bought it.
Oh,
It's so
absolutely.
beautifully exhibited.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.